Good morning, everyone. So as we continue our Justice July series, it's truly my joy to introduce today's speaker, who's a leader whose work truly does speak directly to faith-rooted justice. And so we'll be joined by Lisa and Dean Jacob, who is the North Texas organizer for the Christians Against Christian Nationalism campaign. In this role, Lisa leads the first local organizing pilot of BJC's national effort, offering on-the-ground coordination and strategic leadership to grow this important movement right here in North Texas. Lisa is a proud DFW native who brings a wealth of experience as a clergy across Texas. Alongside, she brings a strong foundation of clinical therapy and social work. She's a social work graduate of UT Austin and holds a master's in counseling from Dallas Theological Seminary and has participated in pastoral formation through Fuller Seminary cohorts. Rooted in deep care for this region, Lisa is building a vibrant base here to support our communities in confronting Christian nationalism. When she's not organizing or preaching, you'll likely find her spending time with her newlywed husband and their dog, diving into either a good book or just having a good board game night. So please join me in warmly welcoming Lisa.
Good morning, Broadway. It is so good to be with y'all today. I am not used to sticking in front of a podium the whole time, so I might be walking around a little bit, but I'll do my best because this is where the mic is, so I'll stick with that. But my name is, as Brittany mentioned, my name is Lisa, and I'm the North Texas organizer for the Christians Against Christian Nationalism campaign. It's a campaign of the BJC, which is the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, which has been around since the early 1900s. My work is mostly in the now what. Christian nationalism is a problem, so now what? What do we actually do? But the now what always starts with the question, so what's really going on? So today, I'm going to be sharing a little bit about what Christian nationalism is. But because y'all are Broadway, and my guess is most, if not all of y'all, are aware of the dangers of Christian nationalism, I won't actually spend too much time talking about what it is. I'll actually head and spend a majority of my time talking about how Christian nationalism sets our current climate, and then I'll be spending the rest of my time talking about the now what. What do we do about it? How do we practically respond? So, what is Christian nationalism? So I'm not one of those speakers that talk at you the whole time. I like engagement. I like talking with you. I like asking questions. So what I'm actually gonna have us do, and I know there's some people walking in and some people in the back of the room, which is totally fine. If you are sitting down, what I'm gonna have you do is I'm gonna go around this room and I want you to share the one word that comes to mind when you hear the term Christian nationalism. I don't want you to explain what you mean by that word. I don't want you to tell us a little definition of whatever word you say. I just want you to say the first word that comes to mind. And for some of you, if you don't know what comes to mind, if nothing comes to mind for you, you can say, I don't know. You got to pass. So don't worry about it. If you don't know how you'd respond, just say, I don't know. But I would love to go around the room, and I want everyone just quickly to say the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word Christian nationalism. So let's start over at this table to my left, and we're just going to quickly go. One word that comes to mind when you hear Christian nationalism. Distortion, yeah. Bad. Power. Cult. Let's go to this table. Self-righteous. Privilege. Christian, yeah. You agree? Yes. What about you? Yes. What about you? We're all sharing the first word that comes to mind when we hear the term Christian nationalism. Hate. Oh, I heard hay. My bad. Hate. Thank you. Anglican. Oh. Congregation? Contradiction. I'm sorry, I can't hear as well up here. Entitlement. Yeah. Fear. Yep. Back over here. Scary. Idolatry. That's a good one. Legalism. Let's go in the back corner with Melissa. Gross. Violence. Control. Anyone else over here want to share? Love to hear from everyone. Just one quick word that comes to mind. White. Yes, we'll be talking about that in a little bit. And by the way, if you want to repeat words that were said, you can repeat words. I just want to hear what is the word that comes to mind for you. So there's a whole table in the back. I'd love to hear from each of you. One word that comes to mind when you hear Christian nationalism. Theocracy. Yep. Racism. What about that back corner? Let's keep going around. Everyone sharing one word that comes to mind when you hear the word Christian nationalism. And you can say, I don't know. So feel free to say, I don't know, so we can go to the next table if that's you. Anyone over there? All right. It doesn't seem like that corner wants to share a little bit. So we'll go back to, let's go back to this center table right here and then go that way. Hypocrisy. Yeah. Cruelty. Fear. Yeah. I didn't hear that term. Jingoism. I don't know what that means, but I would love to learn more about that. What about this table right here in the middle? Hatred. Prejudice. All right, let's shift to that middle table. Yep. White. Yep. The rest of the table? Would love to hear. Control. Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah. Our kind. Our kind. Love? Yeah. People do love things. Yeah. What about the table in the back right there? Any word. Upsetting. Unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. Unchristian. Confusion driven. Let's shift over there. Yeah. Is what? Picture of a building, yeah. Of a business building. Oh, a business, the concept of it, if driving money, profit, yeah. Thank you, Brittany. What about this table in the middle right here? Not Christian. Threatening. White supremacy. Yep. Violence. All right, we got the back 4 tables over there. Let's start up here. What'd you say? Trump. Yeah. Power. Power. That's an important one. What about the rest of the table? Male. Yep, we're going to talk about that in a moment. Fear. Yeah, let's hear from that table. Dominionism. Yes. That might be a term that not as many people are familiar with, but it's definitely rooted in Christian nationalism. So I appreciate that you brought that up. Anything else from that table? Hypocrisy. I don't know where that came from, but somewhere over there. I'd love to hear from the back table in the very far corner, the furthest table. Control. Hypocrisy. Patriarchy. Yep. Idolatry. I appreciate that one came up a couple of times. I think that's really connected with the concept of it being unchristian. Yeah. And yet it touts itself as Christian. What about this last table? Y'all are going to round us out. Anything that y'all would add? Any words that come to mind when you hear the term Christian nationalism? Greed. Yes. All right, y'all. We heard a lot of words, and that's actually a good thing. I think that demonstrates that different words come to each of us when we hear this term, and it speaks to the breadth of the types of understanding of this topic. And it speaks all the more to the reason that we actually have to define it, because if we don't define it, we all understand it a little bit differently. And so to get us on the same page as we talk about Christian nationalism for the rest of our time, I just want us to know how we define it in this room so that we're able to continue to have fruitful conversations. So on your screen, you are going to see how we as an organization define Christian nationalism. And I know that those are tiny words up there. So if it's a little too small for you to read, there's a QR code that you can scan right now, and it'll pull the definition on your phone. If that is hard for you, I think just turn to a neighbor. And what I'm going to have you do in your groups, I just want you to talk quickly. I want you to take a moment to read the definition, and then afterwards talk about a word or two or a phrase that stands out to you from this definition. So take a moment to read it in your groups, and then turn to your neighbor and share one or two words or phrases that stand out to you about this definition. So go ahead and do that. If you can't see it, one helpful tip, I think some of y'all are already doing this, you can use your phone camera and zoom in and take a picture of it, and you'll be able to read it as well. So if you don't want to use the QR code, you can zoom in by taking a picture. So for those of you who are just coming in, what we're doing is we're reading the definition of Christian nationalism, and in your groups or in a pair, I just want you to share one word or two words or phrases that stand out to you in this definition. If you haven't shared with someone next to you, go ahead and do that. We're going to wrap up here in 30 seconds. All right, I'm going to shift and talk a little bit about the definition. But before I do that, I would love to hear from a couple of you. What are one or two words or phrases that stood out to you in this definition? You don't have to raise your hand, you can just say it.
Believe racial inequality is due to the personal shortcomings of minority groups.
Yeah, the belief that racial inequality is due to shortcomings of racial groups. Has and always should be Christian. I'm going to be talking about that in a moment, but that's a critical part of the myth that makes up Christian nationalism, the belief of Christian nationalism. Opposition to education. Yeah, we see that. We're going to be talking about that later today as we talk about the work that we do here in North Texas. Any other words or phrases that stood out to you as you read this definition? I heard two different things. I heard cultural framework and militarism. Yeah, militarism. I think that's an important piece for us to recognize the connection of how that ties into this ideology. So simply put, Christian nationalism, the way that I like to talk about it, is a convergence of Christian and American identities in such a way that cheapens and distorts the Christian faith in exchange for power and excludes other faith traditions and beliefs from experiencing mutual flourishing and equity. It's functionally preserving privilege for Christians. Last time I was here, about a year and a half ago, we talked pretty extensively about this definition. But since then, I've actually started to develop a different way of identifying and speaking into this concept of Christian nationalism. I actually prefer to use the definition that Christian nationalism is the exertion of power to enforce borders, whether those borders are physical, emotional, relational, institutional borders, any kind of border that separates us from someone else. These borders can be creating borders in access to resources, equitable living conditions, land, or even fundamental rights. And this exertion of power is based on the myth that I think someone pointed out a few moments ago. It's based on the myth that the U.S. is, was, and should be a Christian nation. So when I think of it this way, as the exertion of power to enforce borders based on this myth, whether they're ideological or physical borders, it allows us to actually get away from the concept of identity politics, and it allows us to see how actually we can all easily perpetuate these narratives. That Christian nationalism is more of a continuum than a fixed identity. So at this point, I typically talk about how Christian nationalism is undergirded by two key principles: American exceptionalism and white supremacy. American exceptionalism in that Christian nationalism upholds the myth that the U.S. has been singled out by God's providence and places God's blessing on our history, the good, the bad, and the truly evil. And also, it's undergirded by the principle of white supremacy. In this Christian nation myth, it creates and perpetuates a sense of cultural belonging to those who founded and held power at the beginning of the formation of the nation that we know to be the U.S., which is namely white, English-speaking, Protestant Christian men. I won't dive into these two principles that undergird Christian nationalism because you're Broadway. And my guess is most of y'all have begun to at least think critically about this. My hope is that some of y'all were in the class last year that went through the psychology of Christian nationalism and you dove into this more deeply. But I wanted to point to these two principles because they set up a framework in understanding the present landscape today. So, let's talk present. I'm going to shift from defining Christian nationalism to talking about where do we see it today? How does it show up? What does it look like? So the Public Religion Research Institute, the PRRI, has been polling people about Christian nationalism every year across all 50 states and across all political ideologies. PRRI tracks the changes through the years. And each year, these large nationally representative surveys ask 5 key questions, in addition to other ones, but these 5 key questions stick and stay every year. And participants answer them based on a scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Strongly agree to strongly disagree. So I'm going to talk about these 5 statements to help us understand how people think about Christian nationalism. So they don't actually use the term Christian nationalism in the survey at all. They just ask these 5 statements, and this helps people understand what are the beliefs that uphold Christian nationalism. So the first statement that I want to point to that they ask in this survey is, whoops, I missed a bunch of slides, sorry. The first statement that they ask is, the U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. That's the first statement that they ask. Remember, this is a scale of strongly agree to strongly disagree. How much do you agree with this concept? The U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. This points to that myth that I said a few moments ago, that the U.S. should be a Christian nation. The second statement that they ask is, or that they say is, the U.S. laws should be based on Christian values. The U.S. Laws should be based on Christian values. Again, it's pointing to the myth that the U.S. should be a Christian nation. The third statement, if the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore. If the U.S. moves away from Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore. This perpetuates the myth that the U.S. was a Christian nation and should continue to be a Christian nation. The fourth statement, being Christian is an important part of being truly American. Being Christian is an important part of being truly American. That speaks to the myth that the U.S. is a Christian nation. And the last statement that they ask, God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. This speaks to the myth that the U.S. should be a Christian nation. I don't know about you, but in a pluralistic society, these statements are incredibly alarming to me. I want to note that Christian nationalism isn't limited to these 5 statements. These statements simply give us an understanding of the beliefs of people who uphold Christian nationalism. So let's talk about what the survey found out this past year in 2024. And I want to name that this survey in 2024 was done before the transition of power in January. So this is what people were thinking and feeling in 2024. And in a bit, I'll compare it to the previous year. I'm going to get us moving a little bit. So I'm trying to think how I want to do this. I typically have 100 people stand up, and I don't know if we have a full 100 people here, but I want us to represent the demographics of the U.S. in this survey. And so what I'll have us do, I think I'm just going to have 10 people stand up. I think that'll make it a little bit easier for us to see. So could I have 10 volunteers stand up in a line in front of the room? 10 volunteers. You are going to represent the people, the fine people of our nation. How many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I think we got perfectly 10. Thank you so much. Well, actually, I think you're a part of the 10. Come up, come up. All right, so these 10 people represent America. And what I'm going to have you do is I'm actually going to have, so for this demonstration, let's pretend that you are split into 2. So this is Sarah. Yes, hi Sarah. You're gonna represent half of a person and another half of a person. So there's one little part of the statistic that doesn't work out as evenly when I just do it with 10. So Sarah's gonna be 2 halves of one person. All right, so the first half of Sarah over here on the far right represents the 4% of folks who didn't actually know how to answer any of these questions, or they refused to answer. So let's just err on the side that half of Sarah has no idea what Christian nationalism is, and she has no idea what to believe about it. So half of Sarah doesn't know what to believe. All right, So what I'm going to have us do is I'm going to have the next three people from you three right here, from Melissa onwards. You represent 30% of the U.S. who strongly disagree with all 5 statements. These are rejectors of Christian nationalism. So let's give them a round of applause. Yes. These 30% of people strongly reject Christian nationalism. So these 30% of people, y'all can go sit down. So my hope, at the very least, by the end of our demonstration, well, Sarah, if you could stay up, because you're still half a person. I got the other half of you that I need. These 30% of people, my hope is at the end of our time together, we would each be equipped with skills and ideas to get us moving to make this 30% bigger. My hope is that over time, our nation grows more and more away from these principles of Christian nationalism. And so that's my hope here today. So I'm going to talk about the next 3 and the half of Sarah that still remains. The next 35% of people represent skeptics. So these are people that disagree mostly with those statements in the scale, but they're less likely than rejectors to completely disagree. They may see some validity in some of these statements. So you 4 can now go sit down. So this is actually really good news, because remember, we had 10 people on the stage and only 3 people are remaining. So the majority, by a scale of 2 to 1, most Americans at least mostly reject Christian nationalism. If y'all want to scoot in so folks can see the last 30%. All right, so that's good news. By a margin of 2 to 1, most Americans reject these statements of Christian nationalism. Now, these last 3 folks who are standing are very important for us to see and note. These are either the adherents or the sympathizers of Christian nationalism. You either mostly agree or completely agree with these statements. So, together, that's about 3 in 10 Americans who agree with these statements in some capacity. And the problem here today that we're seeing in our current landscape is that these 3 in 10 usually have an outsized influence and an outsized voice in our country to perpetuate this dangerous and anti-democratic political ideology. They continue to undermine a truly pluralistic future. So, why do these 3 in 10 matter if they are not the majority? So could y'all sit at that table? I'm gonna have y'all stand up in a few moments, but I'm gonna let y'all sit down, get a break for a few moments so that we can see you in a moment. So, why do the 3 in 10 matter if they are not the majority? Well, first, we are actually seeing an alarming trend in violence for those who uphold these principles. In fact, our campaign at BJC for Christians Against Christian Nationalism started in response to 3 key events. In 2015, the Mother Emanuel AME shooting. In 2017, the Unite the Right rally. And in 2018, the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting, which were all perpetuated by individuals who enacted violence in part to their Christian nationalistic beliefs. And this was all before January 6, 2021, when armed demonstrators overtook the Capitol and sought to overturn election results to enact violence on the leaders of our country in the name of Christian belief. So let's have the last 3 stand up again. Yes, we have more to learn about you 3. So here's some data that helps us understand the last 30%. So I'm going to let's have one of you wave. Let's have you at the end wave. All right. So we need 1.5. So actually, let's pretend that this lovely woman in the middle is half of a person, 2 halves of one person too. So we have about half of the people of this 30% that believe the following statement. There is a storm coming soon that will sweep away the elites in power and restore the rightful leaders. So half of the 30% believe that statement. I'm going to read that statement again. There is a storm coming soon that will sweep away the elites in power and restore the rightful leaders. This language is directly connected to language used in QAnon conspiracy theories and points to an impulse of revolution. Now, I'm just going to have the woman at the very end represent the 1/3 of this 30% that believes the following statement. Because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. 10% of this 10% of actually across the board, 10% of the nation believes that statement. I don't think I have to speak to the danger of this kind of thinking and rhetoric. This is why the 30% matter. But let me tell you why I'm still hopeful. I'm actually going to have two of you, since I picked on you for the last few minutes, y'all two can sit down. So these last two that sat down, they represent the sympathizers. And that means that 10% of Americans are adherents of Christian nationalism and strongly agree with all 5 of those statements. But the 20% that sat down, these Americans agree with most of these statements on the original scale, but they're less likely than adherents to completely agree. And that's the key point. They're willing to be swayed. There is room to work there. And that's why I have hope today. In fact, you can sit down now. Thank you so much. Our last standing 10%. Thank you. In fact, if you actually compare the survey from 2023 to 2024, 2.5% less people are adherents than they were the year before, meaning that 2.5% of people are less likely to completely agree with those statements. Friends, that's a good thing. We're trending in the right direction. Yeah, it's slow movement, right? It's 2.5%, but hey, it's still trending in the right direction. There's movement here. In the book that Broadway folks read last year, maybe some of y'all were a part of this book study, I'm reading Pamela Cooper White's book, The Psychology of Christian Nationalism. She talks about this research and lays a foundation for how to have conversations with people who uphold these principles. She makes a case for how the last 10% are typically so far gone in this ideology, there's actually not much that can be done to change their minds or hearts. But friends, the hopeful part is that sympathizers and skeptics are often open to the conversation. Though we have to approach the conversations a little bit differently, if the 30% of us who reject Christian nationalism do our work to raise awareness, have empathetic approaches, and pursue conversation and relationship, that means 9 out of 10 people together have the potential to turn the tide. So what do we do about Christian nationalism? We must be committed to doing the interpersonal work with empathy. For skills and how to do that, I actually encourage you to read, if you haven't read it before, or refresh your reading of the book that y'all read last year, The Psychology of Christian Nationalism by Pamela Cooper White. But addressing a problem as big as Christian nationalism cannot simply be done through just interpersonal work. Christian nationalism has been embedded in our systems and institutions of our country. So addressing Christian nationalism requires us to organize, to strategically build collective power to change culture, society, and institutions brick by brick. So what does it mean to organize? How do we build collective power one brick at a time? And how do we know which brick to tackle first? In organizing movements all across the spectrum, we call this cutting the issue. Cutting the issue is identifying the brick by dividing the bigger problem of Christian nationalism into smaller, digestible issues that we can begin then to research, plan, and intentionally exert pressure using people power to work towards change. This is how we developed focus areas within our North Texas Coalition of Christians Against Christian Nationalism. Since Christian nationalism is a larger problem we wanted to address, we had to then ask what were the symptoms or causes of Christian nationalism in our communities. And if you're wondering, how do we address Christian nationalism? This is what I'd ask you and your community to do as well. The concept of cutting the issue is not meant to be done individually, but rather it's in the context of community. So gather up your Sunday school class, your book club, your neighbors, and explore these types of questions together. During those early days of our coalition, we identified many issues, such as queer and trans discrimination, infringement on women's bodily autonomy, voter suppression, gerrymandering. All these things were connected to Christian nationalism. The list, honestly, could go on and on and on. And we then cut those symptoms and causes into further issues of policies, community narratives, or initiatives that fed into each of those larger symptoms that we saw. So, in a moment, you're gonna have to forgive me, this slide looked a little bit different. There were bubbles all around it. It looked a little cleaner, but there's supposed to be 3 tiers, if you can notice. The broad problems on top, the symptoms and causes are in the middle tier, and the issues to address were the bottom tier. So what I'm actually gonna have us do is I'm gonna have you turn to your tables right now. And I'm gonna actually ask you to cut the issue yourself. If Christian nationalism is the top tier, I want you in your groups to identify 2 to 3 symptoms or causes of Christian nationalism. It could be like examples that I gave a moment ago, queer and trans marginalization. It could be immigration policy or anti-immigrant sentiment, whatever you want to put as a symptom or cause. I want you to identify in your table 2 to 3 of those symptoms and causes. And then I want you to connect it to a policy, a community narrative, or an initiative that is fed by that symptom or cause. So I'm going to give you an example before you break out into groups so that you can know what this looks like. So if the broader problem is Christian nationalism, one example is queer and trans marginalization. And an issue to address that's connected to queer and trans marginalization are the bathroom bills. So the top tier would be Christian nationalism, the second tier would be queer and trans marginalization, the third tier would be bathroom bills. So that's an easy way that you can think about breaking it down. Another one that I'll give you an example for in regards to community narrative, so you can understand what community narrative means. This is actually something that our coalition did. Broader problem being Christian nationalism, a symptom of or cause that we identified was anti-immigrant sentiment and policing. So that was the second tier. And the issue that we needed to address was this narrative in our community that immigrants harm our communities. They either bring more crime into communities or they leech our resources. They are harmful in our community. So that was the community narrative that we were hearing and experiencing in our community. So I want you to take a moment in your groups and I don't want you to debate or like really go deep into it, but I want you to just pick 2 to 3 really quickly, symptoms or causes, and then a policy that's connected with each of those 2 to 3 that y'all identified. It doesn't have to be the most important, just brainstorm 2 to 3. If you haven't shifted into talking about your second symptom or cause, I would shift into at least your second one by now, because we'll be wrapping up here in a minute or two. That's great. If you have more than two, that's wonderful. Keep going. Take another 30 seconds to wrap up. All right, let's go ahead and come back together. We're not going to be talking extensively about what you discussed in your groups, but I would love to quickly, and quickly I mean real quickly because we don't have a lot of time, I'd love to quickly hear maybe a couple of different folks share what symptom or cause you talked about, if you could tell us briefly, and what policy, initiative, or community narrative came from that. So just pick one and share it quickly with us. The destruction of education. We're going to be talking about that more. But yes, what policy or initiative did y'all talk about that was connected to that? Yes, destruction of Department of Ed and voucher bills. Thank you. And undermining teachers. Yep. Yeah, that's a community narrative. Yeah, 10 Commandments, banning books. This is all connected to the destruction of our public schools. So I'll hand over here first. Voter repression, yes. Closing polling places, yes. And redistricting, gerrymandering, yes. Super important for us to identify how it's connected with Christian nationalism. Yes.
In the next couple of weeks, the city council is going to vote whether or not to get rid of or not implement the DEI program.
Yeah.
Or take money from the government.
Yes. That's super important. So the DEI programs, is it the Fort Worth County Commissioners Court that's talking about that, or is it Fort Worth ISD? City Council, okay. City Council is talking about DEI initiatives, yep. Yes.
We talked about
Healthcare, yep, healthcare disparity.
Medicaid, Medicare,
Yes.
taking away parental control,
Yeah. Yep.
abortion,
Yes.
version therapy.
There's a lot under that medical piece, yeah. The destruction of our healthcare systems and people's right to choose how they receive the care that they need. Yeah. Well, last one.
I thought of the cause.
The cause.
The biggest cause is the desire for purity.
Yeah, the desire of purity. And I think it actually stems from like what this concept of how people determine what is right, what does it mean to be right, and what does it mean to be pure, and what does that look like based on these few random scriptures that we're going to take out of context and understand, and actually not understand correctly, right? So addressing Christian nationalism requires us to begin by identifying the bricks that we need to bring down so that we can build new bricks up. For the North Texas Coalition, we identified which issues felt most pressing to us and near to the hearts of our coalition members. For us, it was dismantling public education and anti-immigrant sentiment and policing. So immigration and education began to be our core issues as a coalition. The specific policies and narratives that we identified further was the indoctrination within public schools of religion and voucher schemes for education. On the immigration side of things, we identified the issues that we wanted to address as Operation Lone Star funding, unlawful detention of immigrants, and narratives that paint immigrants as harming our communities. So this is a little bit about how we as a coalition broke down. I know it looks a little weird, it didn't transfer correctly, but this is how we as a coalition decided to cut the issue of Christian nationalism. And then on the road, you'll see some of the ways that we decided to put pressure. I don't know if you'll be able to see all of them, so I'll talk quickly a little bit about each one. But there are a lot of ways that you can cut the issue of Christian nationalism, but you have to choose which is your brick to take on. Because if we all take on various bricks, together we do have a real chance of dismantling Christian nationalism in our institutions and society today. So after you cut the issue, what happens next? From there, we as a coalition needed to develop our strategy of how to apply pressure towards change. This formed the basis of our campaign work in this past year. On the immigration side of things, we began by addressing that community narrative that immigrants are creating harm in our communities. And so what we brainstormed is, well, we're going to go to different media outlets and write letters to the editor. Anytime we see anything about immigration, we're going to write a letter to the editor that shares a story about how immigrants actually bring good to our communities. We want to counter the narrative and show that they don't harm our communities, they bring good. And so that's part of how we thought through strategically addressing that need. In addition to that, we worked in the legislative session these past 4 months. We did email, postcard, and phone call campaigns to ask our legislators to reduce Operation Lone Star funding and vote no on a bill that proposed to revoke bail for our undocumented migrant neighbors. This bill was called SJR 1. We also met with our legislators in person, and we spoke with their staff. We set up follow-up meetings afterwards to continue to build those relationships and pull for more equitable immigration policy. As a result, through the advocacy of many communities, including our own, we saw a $3 billion reduction in Operation Lone Star funding this year. It started at $6.5 billion, it was reduced to $3.5 billion. In addition to that, we were able to kill SJR 1 on the Senate floor, which was quite exciting for us. This is the bail bond bill that I shared a moment ago. Though addressing Christian nationalism through immigration feels really big and overwhelming when you think about it that way, particularly in a state like Texas, when we cut these big problems into smaller issues, we're able to affect the change we want to see brick by brick. Our North Texas Coalition did this on the education side of things as well. We worked to deter the implementation of the Bible-based curriculum in K-5 schools by putting pressure on the State Board of Education. Similarly, we worked hard to put pressure on our legislators to shake the voucher vote. Though both of these pieces ultimately passed, I want to name that due to the work we did in conjunction with many partners, we were actually able to reduce harm and see wins along the way. Sometimes picking up a brick to build a new way looks like working to reduce harm. And other times it's building power now so that we can affect greater change down the road. And these were the wins that we saw when we did the slow and steady work. It was the prophet Zechariah who said that God doesn't despise small beginnings. So friends, neither should we. In the voucher fight, we saw this in that we were able to add an amendment that created accountability for third-party vendors who were distributing the funds. This amendment was actually introduced by a fellow Fort Worth neighbor who decided that she was going to talk to her legislator about this amendment. And that legislator had never heard about this, but realized the implications were great, and so added this amendment in the amendment process, and this was added to the final bill. It reduces harm. Through the seeds she planted, we were able to see one brick taken away. We also saw power being built through the story of fighting against the Bible-based curriculum. So I guess many of you here are probably identifying as Christian in some sort of way, and so you're probably wondering, why do we not want Bible-based curriculum in our schools? And I hope that most of you would see that as a problem, but just in case that's some of you, the reality was it is the exertion of Christian privilege in public schools to demand that non-religious and non-Christian students read religious texts and understand it in that way. And so that we as a Christian group decided that we have to stand out and speak up against this Bible-based curriculum. And so this is actually a really neat story. I'm going to try to share it really quick so we can wrap up here. But in May 29th of last year, we saw that the TEA had dropped their curriculum, May 29th, 2024. It was the first time we'd heard of it. They gave us a 2-month window to study and learn the curriculum. This was thousands of pages of curriculum. They had 2 months for us to study and learn it so that in August, we would have a 2-week window to submit public comments online. And they also announced in May, at the end of May, at the very beginning of June, that in September, there would be public hearings that we can go and speak to the state board. And so that's what we did. All summer, June and July, we focused all summer on reading the curriculum, identifying problematic passages in the curriculum, and making a case for why this was problematic. We hosted webinars with folks to educate people on what this curriculum said, because it's thousands of pages that we were pouring through. And then in August, we helped people submit those public comments online. And let me tell you, it was an archaic system that was really hard to use, but we were able to figure it out, and we submitted thousands of comments online. After the mid-August point, then we shifted to helping people develop their testimony to come with us in September and share public testimony in front of the state board. What was really cool about that is we brought a bus of people here from DFW with us, and we testified on that day. And about 90 to 95% of the people that testified were all against the curriculum. That was pretty awesome to see. And let me tell you, this was supposed to be a hearing that was for a few hours. We had so many people want to testify that they had to sit and listen to us from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. that night. It was incredible, right? They heard over and over again. And reality was we were saying the same things over and over again. And some people are like, what's the point if it's just repetition at that point? And it's like, the point is they're hearing from their constituents that we care, that this matters, that we're against this, and you need to represent the will of the voters. And so they heard from us, and they heard from us strong. And so much so that people that were for the curriculum were really upset. So in August, the vote was across, we had gotten a soft vote to see where the representatives landed, and it was across partisan lines. It was 11 people that were for the curriculum and 4 people that were against the curriculum. In the course of the following months after our testimony, the vote was going to happen in mid-November. In the course of the next months, we sent email after email. We called our state board reps. We talked to them. We met them for coffee. So much so that the representative of this district, she's no longer the representative, but her name is Pat Hardy. Pat Hardy told us that she got 12,000 emails in her email inbox. That was how upset people were about this Bible-based curriculum. So November comes around, and the vote comes around, and we find out that it is 7-7, that multiple people had flipped their votes, and we're excited now, because if it's 7-7, it's a stalemate, right? But they ended up, our governor got wind of this. And so why it was 7-7, because there were supposed to be 15 seats. And at the end of August, the Dallas County rep had stepped down for personal reasons. And so because that person had stepped down in a historically progressive area that would represent progressive values, she would have actually voted against the curriculum. She was part of the 4 that was voting against the curriculum. When she stepped down, Governor Abbott got wind of this and wanted to flip the vote, and he wanted to pass this bill. And so what was interesting is the beginning of November, before this vote, Dallas County had actually already voted on who they wanted to represent them. And that person was set to be sworn in January. But the governor didn't want to put that person provisionally appointed because he wanted the vote to go in his favor. And so he provisionally appointed his crony to take that seat and then change the vote to 8-7. So, friends, you may be wondering, I know we're going to wrap up here, you may be wondering, why does that matter? That matters because through this story, you can see the power that happens when we all work collectively to show our representatives, show our lawmakers, to show our decision makers that we care about issues like this, that we want to see change. So sometimes picking up a brick looks like building power now so that we can effect greater change down the road. I'm not sure how each of you cut the issue at your tables today, but each of you have the opportunity to get involved and make a difference in whatever areas you discussed. There are incredible coalitions across your community. I'm going to shout out the Justice Network of Tarrant County. Y'all are doing great things around gerrymandering. If you're not involved with that, I encourage you to look into that. If you care about immigration or education, I encourage you to get involved with us. We are doing good work to fight immigration issues that are going on in our community. And so if that's you, I actually want to encourage you, invite you to do something with us this week. This coming Saturday, we are having a day-long event called Gather and Grow. Gather and Grow is a time of vision and training where we're going to be doing things like cutting the issue. You will have a step up on people in that room because you will know what cutting the issue means. We're going to be doing that at the beginning of the morning, but then we're going to be spending the rest of our time going deeper and figuring out not only are we going to cut the issue, but think about our strategy moving forward in this next year for our community now that we're past the legislative session. So I want to encourage you to join us. It's 10 to 4 p.m. on Saturday. It's in Arlington, so not terribly far from here. I tried to find a spot that was middle of Dallas and Fort Worth, so that's Arlington is what we got. A little bit closer to the Fort Worth side, so y'all should be happy about that. But 10 to 4, we'll be having Gather and Grow. Afterwards, we're having an optional training from 4 to 5:30 because we're going to do a court observation training for immigration court for those who are interested in volunteering by bearing witness in the immigration court space. So we'd love for you to join us. That QR code signs you up for Gather and Grow. You can also participate if you want to be a part of immigration and education work. You can sign up for our coalition. This is the sign up right there. We'd love to have you join us. We meet once a month. I know I'm out of time. We meet once a month, so you can join us for our coalition meetings as we think about what policies we want to get behind and think about what we want to do practically as a community. So I'm going to pitch one last thing, and this is something I actually talked to Pastor Price about. So Ryan and I had some great conversations over the last weeks about how do we deepen the relationship with our North Texas Coalition and Broadway Baptist Church. And so I'm experimenting with this idea. I'm trying to create pods from every church of 3 to 5 key community members of that church that would meet with me maybe once every 2 to 3 months, and we brainstorm what is the work that we're doing Christians Against Christian Nationalism, and how can we contextualize that for the Broadway community and get more people involved in those initiatives locally. And so if you want to be in that pod, come talk to me afterwards. I'm also going to put my information on the screen. You can also email me. My email is on the screen. Would love to have a couple of people from Broadway that really champion addressing Christian nationalism within this community specifically. And so if you're interested, Ryan is really excited about this idea, and I am too, and so I would love to experiment with what this would look like if we had a pod from Broadway that was specifically focused on this. So all this would look like is you join our coalition and coalition events, but you'd also meet with me, and we'd figure out ways to implement these things within Broadway itself. So you know Broadway better than me. You know the rhythms of the church, you know how to engage, and so we want to figure out how do we bring this here to Broadway. So with that said, I just want to thank you for your time. I know I'm out of time, so thank you so much for hanging with us today. So grateful for each of you, and I just want to say thank you for the witness of Broadway. You are changing our community. Each of you are part of a community that is doing good work and bringing the kingdom here and now. And so I just want to thank you for your faithfulness to be a part of the work of justice and living out our faith in that way. Thank you so much.